Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Turin here with another Warhammer Total War online commentary. In this particular battle, I'll be playing the Dwarves, and I'm going to be facing off against the Greenskins. So just a disclaimer, this is by far one of the most ridiculous games I've played in the past few weeks, but I think you guys will enjoy it for that reason. So let's quickly go over my army composition here. So in the front line, I have Dwarf Warriors mixed in with Longbeards, and then I also have the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass. So these guys are pretty solid. All of them have pretty good stats for frontline troops, and especially when supported by Runesmiths and Rune Lords, they're going to be pretty darn sturdy. But unfortunately, my opponent does have a ton of SQUIGS, as you guys will see momentarily. In the back line, I do have several groups of Longbeards, so it looks like 1, 2, 3. I think there's just 3. And then I also have the Grumbling Guard over here, who are pretty strong. I actually like them quite a bit. I've been experimenting with them. They've been doing pretty well. And then I have a group of Miners, just because I didn't have any more money, really. And I just wanted to, have these guys as auxiliary, just plug them in, throw them at a group of, SQUIGS or Orc Boars, just something to serve as fodder, essentially. But as far as the general army composition goes, these are the front line guys will take the brunt, and then these Longbeards, who have less defensive stats, will follow up, and they're essentially there to deal with Black Orcs. There's a few fairly popular builds among the Greenskins. One of them is kind of a more Black Orc Biggin type build, which, again, you have to have Longbeards with great weapons or some sort of armor-piercing equivalent, whether it be hammers or Peak Gate Guard, or else you're just going to get crushed by the Black Orcs. And then, to deal with Biggins, Dwarf Warriors, and, Longbeards, and just those standard troops are going to be pretty good, so that's a pretty healthy mix. But also, the other popular composition is the SQUIGS. So people will spam SQUIGS and Nasty Skulkers and Doom Divers and all that type of stuff, so that, again, will punish this kind of traditional Dwarf formation. So in order to kind of counter that, I brought these Gyrocopters, just the standard anti-infantry ones, and they do a really good job cutting through Biggins. They do an amazing job cutting through Goblins and low-tier troops. They definitely hurt the leadership of the opponent's forces, and they also have a bomb. So against like the Rusty Arrows or Goblin Archers, these guys can get through them pretty quick, whereas if you were to just spam the Gyrocopters with Brimstone guns, they'll get cut to pieces by the Rusty Arrows and Goblin Archers and all those type of troops. So kind of have that nice little mix there, and these guys are going to be really, really good against SQUIGS, because SQUIGS don't have much armor, and they also have fairly low leadership. If you guys take a look, that group of SQUIGS over there, they actually only have, it looks like 49 leadership with buffs and encouragement. So a few volleys from this will definitely send them running to the hill. So it's kind of a brief overview of my army, and of course the most important thing is against the Greenskins, I found this to be really successful. I just bring a Rune Lord and then several Runesmiths. Now I went a little overboard this game in bringing the Runesmith with, or 3 of them I should say, but it actually worked out really, really well against the SQUIGS. I was pretty happy about it, and again, there's just the constant spamming of the Rune and Wrath and Rune is really, really strong, and of course cycling of the defensive buffs and the damage resistance is really good. So as far as my opponent's army composition goes, and this is exactly why this game turned out to be quite ridiculous, is he has the Crimson Killers, and then he has 3 groups of Trolls, so that's nothing terribly out of the ordinary. I suppose Trolls are fairly uncommon from the Greenskins, but more importantly, he has 3 groups of SQUIGS here, he has 4 groups of SQUIGS here, and then in the forest he also has 4 groups. So in total, I think he's, what is that, like 10, 12 SQUIGS, some groups like that. It was absurd. And then of course the Trolls, and then he has 3 Goblin Big Bosses and a Night Goblin War Boss. So mass SQUIGS can be pretty devastating. One of the more awful compositions I've had to fight against as the Dwarves is just mass SQUIGS with like 3 Doom Diver catapults sitting in the back line, and they just charge in and you have to advance. It kind of screws up your defensive formation. So in response to that, I kind of brought an army that can move and doesn't really have to worry about protecting cannons, doesn't have any missile troops that are terribly vulnerable. Everything is relatively resilient in melee combat, so I thought that would be pretty valuable for me here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So immediately I send the Gyrocopters to pressure my opponent. As he didn't have any range or anything like that, I figured I would have the advantage in that circumstance. So I'm going to go ahead and start firing in here on these SQUIGS, and you can see it's doing pretty good damage to this group I was targeting. They're down to, 2,800 HP, and of course the bombing run here is going to do pretty well also. You can see it does quite a bit of damage to that first group of SQUIGS. They're actually shaken, so like I was telling you guys, that leadership hit is pretty strong, and I'm just going to be able to continue to shoot these guys from the back line while my hopefully very sturdy Dwarf formation holds up. One thing I wish I had done differently was make a tighter formation, just like a box, and just kind of turtled there, but making this wide formation allows my wings to be clipped and is a little bit dangerous. But on that same note, I also do have the Gyrocopters with the Brimstone guns shooting at the Crimson Killers over here, and they've already racked up quite a bit of kills, so I'm pretty happy about that. But you can see I'm just spamming the Rune of Wrath and Rune in conjunction with those Gyrocopters, and they're tearing these SQUIGS to pieces. This group of SQUIGS got punished pretty hard. This group did also, but unfortunately for me, he just has so darn many. They're coming around in the back line, and I don't have enough troops to stop them all. So thankfully, like I mentioned to you guys, I didn't bring any really, vulnerable missile units, so I'm not terribly concerned about this rear charge, because Dwarves, again, have really, really high leadership. But they're doing their best fighting over here, and the Master Rune of Wrath and Rune just absolutely decimates this group of SQUIGS, so I was very happy about that. And, again, you do need to bring a balanced army to account for all the different compositions, so, thankfully I do have the armor piercing, but it didn't turn out to be that useful, so it's going to be the best here. But the Trolls are getting in there, and they're doing a pretty good job. You can see the Rune Lord in here, and it's just constantly spamming all of these, because I do have 3 Runesmiths, so spamming those defensive abilities is going to be pretty strong, but just the squigs over here and just the pure numbers mixed in with the trolls and you know, the war bosses and all that, this kind of western flank of my dwarvish formation has indeed collapsed. So what I'm going to end up having to do is just pulling into a tight turtle formation and just buying as much time as I possibly can for these gyrocopters to bomb down a lot of the squigs. You can see some trolls routing off here, there's some squigs routing off over here, and as well over here. So the Master Rune of Wrath and Rune is pretty darn strong, and just even the basic one is really strong. You can see the Rune of Oath and Steel is going, but the armor isn't going to be that great with all this armor piercing out here. But the Rune of Negation, more importantly, is the 22% resistance, and then the Master Rune Lord, or the Rune Lord, not the Master Rune Lord, is using the Master Runes, which give 44% damage reduction. So I'm periodically cycling those buffs, just making sure to mitigate as much damage as I possibly can. And you can see these cannons are in here. With the gyrocopters, and they're still firing. So right now I had to pull all my forces into this tight central formation, because having them kind of spread out here was allowing my opponent to eat down my wing, and really not working out. So you can see I fly over and actually do a bombing run and probably hit a few of my own guys, but my guys can definitely take it. But you can see how tightly packed they are from the squigs. So you can see the Grumbling Guard and the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass are just kind of rallying to their lord and receiving all those buffs. And you can see the Master Rune of Wrath and Rune just hammering these squigs. All those gyrocopters are continuing to bomb them. You can see squigs flying up in the air. It's just pure chaos. This was definitely one of the most fun games I've had in the past several weeks. Just absurd. And you know, this build with the gyrocopters and then, you know, an army that essentially doesn't have too many vulnerable spots, it seems to work out pretty well against the Greenskins. I've had some success, but granted, I may not have tested it against the most competitive army builds, but it seems worth a try. Because even against the, you know, as far as the Greenskin anti-air goes, having those gyrocopters with the steam cannons, I think that's what they're called, and then the brimstone gun mixed in there, it can deal with a lot of threats, and a successful bombing run can essentially shut down a lot of goblin archers or rusty arrows or things like that. But regardless, you can see here the dwarves and the miners and kind of the last pocket of resistance are fighting. They're getting all these buffs here, so you can see the Rune Negation is almost always on my forces. It's kind of like a perpetual damage resistance this entire battle. Unfortunately, some of my troops are starting to break. My opponent still has this Night Goblin War Boss, who I'm not sure if he used his potion yet, but he still has Goblin Big Bosses, he has Trolls, but these Gyrocopters are doing a great job routing off and punishing a lot of these squigs. Granted, they're only like 500 resources, so it's not a huge victory, but you know, they're just kind of sitting on the periphery, and every time a group of squigs like runs back into the battle, or you know, trolls come back, they're really good against these low armored trolls as well, because these guys, you know, only 30 armor, so the damage on these Gyrocopters with their steam guns are going to be pretty darn good here. And you can see whenever they come back in, having, you know, what is it, 3 Runesmiths and a Rune Lord, I'm always having a Rune Wrath and Rune Up, which is pretty good at, you know, getting rid of these low leadership units. You can see the Crimson Killers are fleeing. Finally, the Dwarvish resistance is kind of holding out, and the smoke is clearing, and there's still a few dwarves standing, believe it or not. But the squigs are pretty relentless. They're hungry. They're coming back in, so I do a little bombing run there and miss horribly, because they actually routed off before they ran into the bombs. But you can see they're fending them off. They're keeping them off the battlefield and just kind of shooting the Crimson Killers here, the ones with the brimstone guns, and they do have armor piercing, so it's quite good. And at this point, what's left of my opponent's forces? So he has a Goblin Big Boss, and as far as the rest of his troops go, they've all kind of ran to the hills. But unfortunately, the Trolls, they do have regeneration, so once they're able to stabilize, they will regenerate, and you know, I still have another battle to fight for sure. So thankfully, I do have these Gyrocopters here, but they're all out of ammo. So right now, I'm in a bit of trouble, but they're pretty good at ramming kind of these low leadership units and just flying into them with their gyro blades and doing some work there. But my opponent will regroup his forces, so this battle is far from over. You can see my forces are very, very tattered. I have this Rune Lord here who's essentially at 20% HP, but he's still eager, thankfully. I have a Runesmith here. I have some beat up Warriors of Dragonfire 6. Dragonfire 6. They have 6 models left, but Dragonfire Pass. And then I also have the Grumbling Guard, so these regiments of renown definitely paying their dues. And then I have 2 more Rune Lords here, so that's a ton of power right there. Having 3 Runes of Wrath and Rune, literally if I put 1 on each of these units, they'll rout off almost instantly. So the big threat that I still have left is the Goblin War Bosses and the Big Bosses and all those troops. So thankfully these Gyrocopters are over here, and they're just flying over these Crimson Killers and making sure they don't come back. So very, very good value out of these Gyrocopters this game. I was very happy about it. So right now I'm just kind of reforming my ranks, getting ready for the final showdown. The Trolls are coming back. There's a few groups of squigs, but I think it's mostly Trolls. A lot of the squigs are kind of fleeing off the battlefield, understandably so. But these Gyrocopters, they're going to be pretty hard to deal with. I mean, they're still, you know, have 2,500 HP and are in perfect health, and they should be able to ram. So you can see the Rune of Wrath and Rune immediately shatters that group. That group shatters as well, and then when the Gyrocopters come in, they're just going to flee off the battlefield, because these squigs are definitely not hungry for Gyrocopters. But a few Trolls come in here, and they're going after my Rune Lord. He's pretty darn low, but thankfully he does have the Master Rune of Oath and Steel, and has the support of the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass and the Grumbling Guard, as well as this Gyrocopter here, and is able to use the Master Rune on these guys. So that should crush their leadership fairly quickly. You can see they were at -10 there for a second, and they do indeed shatter. So as far as the rest of my opponent's forces go, he has a Goblin Big Boss here, another one here, so I think he has all 3 of his Big Bosses, but unfortunately for him, his Night Goblin War Boss, even with the Spite of the Bad Moon and all those other abilities, is definitely in some serious trouble here. So my forces are kind of rallying, but at this point we'll just go ahead and fast forward because it's just kind of an atrocious battle here. But the Night Goblin War Boss does rout off, so that's pretty big because, you know, Goblins, even the Goblin Big Bosses, don't have a ton of leadership, so thankfully that's enough to crush them. So, man, that was an extremely intense game. I was just kind of stressing the whole time, just had SQUIGS running everywhere, and things were kind of out of control. But just in hindsight, what I think I should have done is just created a tighter box formation so the SQUIGS couldn't have enveloped me as much. But, you know, again, I wasn't expecting a massive SQUIG onslaught. You know, I was expecting a little bit more of a balanced army with maybe some more Black Orcs and maybe, you know, 3 or 4 groups of SQUIGS. But that was definitely an interesting test for my Doggy folk here. So, again, really good game to my opponent, Yerk 4K. I look forward to seeing you again on ladder, and I hope you guys enjoyed that Dwarf cast. Have an excellent night, and take care.